Jewish Pirates of the Caribbean. Please join me in welcoming Mary Friedman.
I am very happy to talk about this story about my brother's book and how it came to be, and a little bit about my brother, and a little bit about the stories that he included in the book. So, first of all, Jewish Pirates of the Caribbean. It's amazing how a title can make the difference between a bestseller and one that gets only a few sales at a time. The Jewish Pirates of the Caribbean came out in 2008, in November of 2008. It was on the bestseller list for nonfiction in Boston, in Los Angeles, in Miami, and in Washington, D.C. Unfortunately, it never made the New York Times bestseller list, but we'll be happy for whatever we get. But the title did not come from my brother. My brother brought a book to Random House with an agent at the time. And when he brought the book, he was calling it The Search for Columbus's Gold, which he thought was a great title. But they said to him, after they read the book, they said, no, you have to focus on the pirates. And Jewish Pirates of the Caribbean is the title you need, and we're going to give you $15,000 to spend the next year or two changing the focus of the book. And when it's done, we'll give you another $15,000, and after that, whatever you get for royalties will be fine. So, so sometimes the publisher makes more of a difference than the author. But now we'll go on with the talk. Okay, one of the things that we found just shortly before the book came out, they uncovered a cemetery in Port Royal. And this is one of the tombstones, and you can see the Hebrew writing and the skull and crossbones. So that sort of gives you an idea of what was going on. This is what I'm going to talk about. First of all, you're going to know about who my brother was. I'm going to tell you how and why he wrote the book. I'm going to tell you about the covert Jews called conversos that arrived in Jamaica. My brother, I have videotape of my brother talking about two pirates, Samuel Palash and Moses Cohen Enriquez. You'll also learn about how Jews that were in Brazil, in the colony of Recife, which I will describe, journeyed to New Amsterdam to become the first Jewish settlers in what eventually became the United States. And lastly, we're going to talk about Port Royal, and then you will learn more about Port Royal and what happened. It was a pirate capital. And Eddie did not want to give up the search for Columbus's gold, so it's an epilogue at the end of the story. Okay. So here is a picture of my brother. He was a very handsome man, as you can see. I'm going to tell you a little bit about his background. He loved adventure. He loved attention. And he loved being a big fish in a little pond rather than competing in a larger community. So Jamaica worked out very well for him. I'm going to go on now and tell you a little bit more about Ed. First of all, when he graduated, when he was attending college in 1960, he spent his summer vacation going to Cuba right after the revolution. And luckily it was 1960, and it had not yet been, the government of the United States had not yet forbidden Americans from going there. So he was in that nice little time, and he spent the whole summer there learning everything that was going on in the revolution. Came back to the University of Vermont, where he wrote essays for the school newspaper. The following year, he went to Haiti and the Dominican Republic. And you know what he did there? He was hitchhiking across the Dominican Republic when he was stopped by police. How could a white man be going from one car to another? He must be dealing drugs. Either he's selling them or buying them. Luckily, he did not have drugs on him at that time. And so he was let go. And he came back with more stories for the newspaper. After he graduated, he then he went to the service because that was required at that time, and he was in a Army Reserve for 6 months, and then he had about five or 6 years that he had to be in the reserves. Luckily, this was still 1962. There was no Vietnam, so he just got in under the wire on that as well. When he got back, he asked me to film him, take a whole series and make a portfolio because he thought he is handsome enough to be a model. And this is one of the pictures we took at the time. Well, he got a few jobs, but he never made it as a model. So then he decided he would go back to his writing career. And he became a reporter for the newspaper in Yonkers, New York. And he worked on sports and local politics. But by 1966, he was getting itchy, and he said, I want to do something else. And he saw an ad for the Jamaican Tourist Board. Jamaica had become independent in 1962, and they were anxious to develop their tourist trade and get more people coming after the change in administration. So he was hired by the tourist board, and his job was to promote the tourism as Jamaica as a destination. He was able to travel all over the island and see things that he wanted to promote and write articles about and take pictures of, including finding sites for films that would be shot in Jamaica. So he worked with the producers on Papillon and Dr. No, and he really enjoyed that. But he also met political leaders of Jamaica, and he got to do research, and that's what he was always very good at. He was a fantastic researcher. He traveled from one library to another. He even came here to UNC's library, but he went to the archives of Spanish Town, which was the old capital of Jamaica. And in that, he found a pirate journal. And we are going to hear him tell about that.
And I have a story to tell you that has taken me, more than half my life to put together. But it's an exciting story. Basically, it's untold.
What happened was when I went to Jamaica as a job, I was reading a book, a pirate's journal, of his first invasion of Jamaica in 1643, where he finds the capital deserted, except for some Hebrews of the Portuguese nation who came unto us seeking asylum and promising to show us where the Spaniards had hidden their gold. Portuguese Jews in a Spanish island seeking asylum from an English pirate? I didn't understand this, what was going on. That opened my idea, or opened the door to the fact that there were so many secret Jews in the New World disguised as Portuguese Christians.
So you get to hear a little bit about my brother. His next hint about what the story was all about came from Sir Neville Ashenheim. Sir Neville was the Jamaican ambassador to the United States but he was also the head of the Jewish community in Jamaica at the time. And he said, Ed, did you know that the Jews have been in Jamaica since the time of Columbus? Of course, they were conversos at the time. They were hidden. They were not allowed to practice Judaism. The thing you have to know is there were at least 500,000 Jews in Spain during the 1300s and 1400s. Many of them were forced to convert or to be murdered or to be put to death in various ways. The Inquisition also, if you converted to Christianity, you were still suspect. So you were called conversos or new Christians. And if they suspected that you were practicing Judaism on the sly, they could capture you and torture you. And this is a picture of the Grand Inquisitor Tomás Torquemada. And we'll go over this is one of the torture things, which I want to skip over as much as possible. But I want you to understand why the subtitle of this book is Revenge, because this is what they were escaping, the torture, the Inquisition, and how important it was to get away from the Inquisition. We all know that Columbus sailed in 1492. We know that he asked the Queen of Spain to finance his trip. Luis de San Angel was the royal treasurer. He was also a converso. And it was his money that actually was used to finance the trip, because he was concerned about finding a place for the Jews. There was an edict published less than a month before Columbus left, and that edict said, convert or you are expelled from the country. So they were forced to leave, and many of them went. And many of the countries that we think of as having Jews were forbidden to the Jews as well. England wasn't taking them. France wasn't taking them. They went to North Africa. They went to Turkey. They went to Greece. But they found wherever they could find shelter. And so it was very important to St. Angel that they find some new place to go. And here they are going, and at least 4 conversos were part of the crew on the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria. In 1494, a couple of years later, Columbus was actually marooned on Jamaica, and the crew of the ship was in mutiny, and half of the crew stayed with him on Jamaica and half stayed on the ship. Eventually they were rescued, and they joined back together and were able to sail back. But some of that crew, Ed feels, are the original people that stayed in Jamaica, the original conversos that stayed in Jamaica. And the reason that we think that happened is that one document that he found was a letter to Charles V of Spain in 1534, where he receives a letter from Jamaica asking permission for 34 more Portugals to settle there. Remember, Charles is the king of Spain, not the king of Portugal. But Portugals were a word for the new Christians, and that were Jews to begin with. And it is used throughout a lot of the literature of the time, talking about the Portugals. So they have had various names. They also were called Marranos, which was a slur term meaning pigs. But Ed likes to call them hidden Jews, secret Jews. So throughout his book you will see that. So, as I said, the Portugals were the covert Jews disguised as new Christians, or new Christians as well. Not all of them were going to go back to Judaism. And the Spanish law said that if you had not been Christian for at least 4 generations, you were not allowed to settle in the New World. So by saying they were Portugals, they could settle, they could get around this 4 generation. So, now, one thing that made Jamaica a haven was that Jamaica was the property that was given to Columbus by the King and Queen of Spain. This was the only land that the Columbus family had in perpetuity. And in 1535, Donna Maria del Toledo, who was the widow of Columbus's son, negotiated a new agreement in which she said, "We will not allow the church to rule in this country. The church, our Columbus family has dominion over this island, and the Inquisition is not allowed here." And for over 100 years, that remained in effect. So it became a location where if the Jews or the new Christians came to Jamaica, they knew that the Inquisition wasn't going to follow. Some of you may know that the Inquisition came to Mexico, it came to Peru, and people were killed, and their property was confiscated. Several of the families actually moved north into New Mexico, and we're now finding out stories about people whose ancestors were formerly Sephardic Jews. Oh, for your information, Sephardic Sephard was the name for Spain, and so when we talk about the Jews that came from Spain, we call them Sephardic Jews. By the way, if you want to interrupt me at any time with a question, I know I'm throwing a lot of new things at a lot of you that may not. It's history unknown, and that is what really excited Ed. That these were a story that had never been told. Okay, so the fact that Columbus's family ruled Jamaica became a very important part. Now, as I said, Ed, as you heard in his first clip, said that he spent almost 40 years writing this book. He worked on and off in Jamaica. He worked back at the United States sometimes. He worked in Jamaica sometimes. Sometimes he just wrote a few articles from his little home that he had in what he calls the bush. He lived in a little town called Roaring River, which had about 300 people. And if anybody has been to Jamaica, it's about 25 miles from Negril. It's not anywhere near Kingston. It's not anywhere near Montego Bay, some of the big resorts in Jamaica. So first he was going to talk about the secret Jews. Then he moved to what he called Zion's warriors to show what kinds of things they were doing to sort of subvert what was going on. And then he was in his research, he came across a trial which mentioned that there may have been gold hidden. I don't know whether it was a gold mine or it was treasure that was buried, but that became a major interest because, as I said, Ed loved adventure, and what could be more adventurous than to find a lost gold mine? But as his editor said, we know what sells. Jewish Pirates of the Caribbean is going to sell. So, Okay, and here is Ed with his close friend Ainsley Enriquez, whose family has been in Jamaica for many, many years and is somewhat related to one of the characters that we're going to hear about. But take a look at those documents. If you can see, they're really falling apart, and it's amazing that they still exist today. Okay, now we got Ed again, and now I got to learn. I know how to do it now.
Pirate rabbi. One of the most fascinating characters is Samuel Palash. He was a Barbary pirate, originally from North Africa. Goes back to the beginning of the 17th century. In fact, he sailed from Morocco. He sailed to Amsterdam, where he made a deal with William of Orange, saying, I will set up trade. Morocco and Amsterdam or Holland are both enemies of Spain. Why don't we band together against Spain, and I'll also set up a trade treaty with you. Of course, I want 10% of the action, and I'm willing to take a pirate crew to attack the Spanish shipping. In return, I want Holland or Amsterdam to allow Jews to legally settle here. By 1610, the first legal settlement of Jews were allowed in Amsterdam and held their first services at the home of the pirate rabbi Samuel Palash. By 1614, he is the president of Never Shalom, which was the name of the community, but he's getting itchy. And he decides, enough with this teaching and being a rabbi. I want to go back to piracy. So he recruits a crew of sea beggars. Those were the Dutch pirates, along with some corsairs, which were the Moroccan pirates, and some fellow Jews. And he goes out, and he captures 2 Spanish ships. This is a guy who's in his 60s now. On his way back, he gets caught, or he runs into a storm and gets caught. He has to put in England at Plymouth, and the Spanish ambassador says, arrest that man. He's a heretic, he's a pirate. And there's a trial. England, though, has no love for Spain, acquits him. He goes back to Holland. He soon dies a couple of years later. The interesting thing, or one of the interesting, he used to sail with a kosher chef. And on the front of his ship was a phoenix, which was like a statement that you can destroy individual Jews, but as a people we rise again.
So he did found the synagogue in Amsterdam. Of course, this picture is taken many years later when the community became much bigger, because once the Jews were allowed to settle there or allowed to practice openly, it became a major center for Jewish life. But meanwhile, there were young men that were studying under the pirate rabbi in the synagogue, and some of them actually became became pirates themselves. Others of them became merchants. And we're going to hear about 2 brothers, but I'm going to show you the next pirate, Moses Cohen Enriquez. What a character he was.
There's Moshe Cohen Enriquez, who seized the Spanish silver fleet in 1628, who, according to the
Inquisition documents. Moses is nothing but a spy to learn when the Spanish silver fleet sails and accompanied Pete Heine, the admiral, in the siege of the Spanish silver fleet in 1628, which was the largest haul in piracy history, and about $1 billion in today's currency. This financed Holland's reinvasion of Recife, and Moses, with his share of the booty or the plunder of his silver, set up his own pirate island off of Recife, named it Antonio Vaz, which was his Spanish name. And according to the rules of the synagogue, Zur Israel, that was set up, he had to donate 3% of his booty to the synagogue. But they also got very annoyed at him and fined him 60 florins because he used to take Christian women into the mikveh.
Okay, this is a map of the routes of the Spanish fleets, and you can see they go right past Jamaica, they go right past Hispaniola, and all you had to do, you had to know those routes, and then you could plan where to attack the ships. I don't have a map showing exactly where the ships were attacked, but by capturing that ships, they made, as he said, they made a fortune, and they established this colony in the northern Brazil called Recife, which still exists today, but it's no longer a colony. The Dutch then took over Recife and Pernambuco as well. And the big thing was that as soon as they took it over, the Jews were able to practice their religion and not be considered covert, no longer considered new Christians. And I am going to read a little piece. One of the interesting things about Ed's book is that he does use a lot of quotes from original people. So this is what, let's see. At a tribunal, a turncoat said this: "The Jews of Amsterdam were responsible for the capture of Pernambuco, and the principal one was Moses Cohen Enriquez, who went with the Hollanders and instructed them and gave them plans showing how to take the place, for he had spent many days in Pernambuco and was well acquainted with the entrances and exits. The Hollanders did this by his secret counsel." And in another place, a Portuguese priest, Father Manuel Calado, who lived in Dutch Brazil from 1630 to 1646, said this: "The Jews had come from Holland, had many relatives in Pernambuco who had lived in conformity with the laws of Christ. However, after the Dutch had conquered the country, they lifted the mask which had disguised them and circumcised themselves and declared themselves publicly as Jews. I heard it said many a time by Jews that there was no man of their nation, that is, conversos, in Pernambuco who was not a Jew. Or if they did not declare themselves as Jews, it was because of the fear that the world might turn and Brazil might be returned to Portugal. Otherwise, they would all have publicly declared themselves as Jews." So these were some of the observations. So as I said, he was researching all over the world, and he would find these documents. Putting them all together was the big job. Okay.
What did you study in school?
What
did you study?
Latin American history. Yes, so he was in the right field. This is a close-up of the map that we showed in the video. And as you can see, the island of Antonio Vaz, and right off the coast of the Recife harbor. So the Recife colony was Dutch, and of course there were Calvinists there. There were people of many religions, but there weren't many Catholics, because the Catholics were in the Catholic country. And then we get to the next part of the story, where in 1654, the Portuguese reconquer Recife, and the Jews are told if they do not go back to being Christian, they must leave within 3 months. So 14 ships take off for Holland. 2 ships do not. One goes to Curacao, and the other goes to New Amsterdam to be the first set of Jewish settlers in what becomes the United States. However, there was a little problem. The Falcon was the ship in which they left Recife to go to New Amsterdam, but it was blown off course, and it ends up in Jamaica. And unfortunately, at this time, the power of the Columbus descendants is weakening, and the church is trying to get back in, and they see this as an opportunity to maybe they'll get their foot in and put these Jews to the tribunals. However, their rules say that they can only arrest those who were formerly Christian and who had converted back to Judaism. But many of the people on the boat were born after 1630, so they're youngsters, but they were born in Recife as Jews. And a couple of them were born in Amsterdam after Amsterdam had their right to become Jews. So those people that were considered Jews were allowed to leave Jamaica while the others were forced to stay. So then they finally take off and they go to Cuba, where they are now put on another boat called the St. Catherine, and they arrive in New Amsterdam in September. So most people do not know that it took from February to September for this intrepid group of 24 Jews that arrive in New Amsterdam, most of them under the age of 24.
Pardon me, I'm stupid. New Amsterdam, that's New York City.
Right, New York City, right. That's where they headed. And Peter Stuyvesant, the leader, was there. He has more to say about that, which I'm not going to go into today.
What was the motivation for them going there?
Because it was a Dutch colony. And remember, they were originally coming from Amsterdam, so they could go there or they could go back to, as I said, 14 ships went to Holland. It's only this group that went to New Amsterdam. Okay. Okay. Now we go back to Jamaica. Here we are in Jamaica. They have these people that were on the boat that were not 24 or less, or were not born Christian. But meanwhile, they are working with Cromwell, who has taken over the country of England. And Cromwell sends out General Venable and Admiral Penn. And their job is to help form an English colony in the New World. They first attempt to attack Hispaniola, which is the island that includes Haiti and the Dominican Republic. They are slaughtered there. 1,000 of them are killed. So they then go on to Jamaica. Well, they have 38 boats going into the harbor in Jamaica. And there are only 1,500 people living on Jamaica at the time. So they give up completely. They surrender. And 2 Jamaican officers, both covert Jews, Francisco Caravalhal and Duarte Acosta, greet the English and sign the agreement to turn Jamaica over to England. And as soon as that's done, the Jews are granted the right to practice their religion in Jamaica, and a year later, they are allowed to practice in England. There have been Jews living in England up till then, but were not allowed to practice their religion until 1656. Okay, so now, why did Jamaica become a pirate island? Well, we heard about the Jews before being pirates, but now we're looking at all of the pirates. We're looking at what they call the buccaneers. And the buccaneers, England was concerned that they were surrounded by several different Spanish islands and territories, and that Spain was going to attack and take that country back as soon as it was turned over. So they figured that the best defense is an offense. So we will take in the pirates and let them be our defenders. And Henry Morgan, a very famous pirate, becomes the deputy governor of the island. And Port Royal becomes the major city. It is one of the wealthiest cities in the New World at the time because of all of the pirate booty. They have a synagogue there. They have a street this is Henry Morgan. Here is a picture of Port Royal. The Jews become merchants and deal in the pirate plunder. And we're going to hear a little bit of that from Eddie. See this map? The High Street, which if you know England, High Street usually means what we would call Main Street, is called Jew Street. And the reason it's called Jew Street is because there are all of these merchants that have shops along the street, the Jew Street. But unfortunately, I should have moved this in a different place, but unfortunately, about 50 years later, there is a tremendous earthquake and 2/3 of Port Royal falls into the sea. Here we have an eyewitness account of the quake in Port Royal, and I'm going to read you because I know you can't read that. Eyewitness account of Port Royal earthquake written on board a ship in the harbor of Port Royal 12 days after the quake. The fatal day began very calm and fair. There was no wind stirring, nor anything in the skies that looked suspicious. The quake was over in 4 minutes. Men and houses were swallowed up by the gaping earth, and many others were swept by the inundation. I never in my life before saw such a day of terror. Okay, well, in the year 2000, Ed's friend Ainsley Enriquez asked for an inventory of Jewish cemeteries around the island of Jamaica. And one of the cemeteries that they worked on was the Hunts Bay Cemetery, which was right outside of Port Royal and had been the cemetery in which the Jews had been buried during the time of the city of Port Royal. And we're going to hear Ed talk again. And this one was interesting because it was not our video, but my sister was there. This video was taken in 2010. My brother was having chemotherapy at UNC, and he would be off for 3 weeks while in between treatments. And he went down to Jamaica because there was a special conference of Sephardic Jews being held in Kingston. And while it was being held there, Ed led a tour through the Hunts Bay Cemetery.
The legacy of the 17th century.
We need it louder.
Who
came from Port Royal, which is across the harbor, the journey that they took over to here to bury the deceased. When you walk around, you will see every familiar name in Sephardic history. They all came to Jamaica, passed through Jamaica, or had relatives down. For 150 years during the Spanish rule, Jamaica, this island that we think of as a tourism capital, was a homeland for Jews avoiding the threat of the Inquisition. It was a haven in the New World. When the Inquisition finally did threaten, they got in touch with England, they conquered Jamaica, kicked out the Spanish, and allowed the so-called Portuguese to come out of the closet as Jews. What did the Jews do? They became the merchants of Port Royal. They had been trading here in the New World from the get-go for 150 years with other conversos, secret Jews in all the different colonies. So when it came to rob the ships, they knew who was shipping what to whom, and underground throwing secret letters to their friends. What was the cargo? What was the route? And even, indeed, what the captain might have stashed in his cabin. They therefore were able to advise the buccaneers, sponsor them, and get first dibs on the booty. The Jews stayed, and that's basically the story till 1692, when half of Port Royal slid beneath the sea, and the golden age of buccaneering was ended.
Here we have the tomb of the wife of Moses Cohen Enriquez, the Hunts Bay Cemetery. And you notice they have it in English and Hebrew as well. And then over here is a tomb of another pirate, and you can see the skull on one side, the crossbones on the other, the tomb of Abraham Alvarez, and again in Hebrew as well. And now the last part of the story is that epilogue that I was talking about, the gold mine, or the gold, the search for gold. When Ed was going through all these papers, he came across a trial, and those papers that you saw earlier, that was part of the trial documents. There was a dispute between two brothers, Moses Cohen Enriquez, we heard about before, and Abraham Cohen, who was a merchant in Port Royal and also in Brazil. Anyway, they were fighting over a piece of land, and there were all sorts of inferences about why this land would be valuable. They came in, and there is also a map, and I'll just show you the map. Here's the gross map, and here's the close-up map of the territory. Why were they having such a debate over this little piece of land? And judging from documents and things that were going on, there was a story that had been passed down and by various people that Columbus had gold that he had either buried or that he had discovered a mine. But it was never resolved, and we just will have to assume that it was just a fight over nothing, but we try. It was an adventure, as I said, Ed loves adventure. And this was the valley in which that gold mine was supposedly located. And today, there is a synagogue still in Kingston, and there were at one time 21 cemeteries throughout Jamaica, 15 different congregations. In the mid-1800s, they allowed the Jews to hold public office, and 1/3 of the legislature in Jamaica at that time was Jewish, and they actually closed on the high holy days. And the Kingston Synagogue and a couple of the other synagogues in Latin America have sand on the floor. And the reason for the sand was to remember their ancestors who had to keep secret their practice of Judaism. And by having sand on the floor, people would not hear the footsteps of the people. And finally, here is my brother in 2010. He was given, and that big thing in his hand is an award that he was given by the Tourist Board of Jamaica for the book, because they said the book had increased the tourism in Jamaica more than any other thing in that year, and so they gave him this award, which he was very happy for. And thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed it.